It's going live now. Okay, I think we're live on Facebook, guys. So good evening if you just joined us. We are live on Facebook. Thanks for everyone that commented and liked our video last week. We've come back today to talk about a follow-up really to last week, to talk about the IBS diagnosis and a little bit about how a nutritionist and an osteopath would deal with that differently, but how would they both work together to be able to resolve the condition if you've been diagnosed with IBS. So we're going to leave you with 3 top tips at the end, as usual. So stick around to the end and hopefully we'll be able to give you some useful advice that will help point you in the right direction to be able to deal with your upset tummy and symptoms associated with it. So Jane, how's your day been?
Good, very good. Homeschooling and working, it's all wonderful.
How's that been going? So it must be tough.
Yes, it is, but it's fine. I'm very grateful that we're all healthy and happy. That I don't have a teenager doing trigonometry. I just have a 7-year-old. So it's a bit easier.
I think I'd probably find 7-year-old stuff taxing. I'm all about backs and necks at the moment, so I've pretty much forgotten about all that stuff. But it's what kind of stuff do 7-year-olds do at home?
Well, we had spelling tests and division timetable tests, and looking at a book cover and choosing which one you like and how a book cover reflects how you would choose a book and what it means and what it should do, and a load of stuff.
There's stuff.
English and science and all that.
Sarah's at home homeschooling ours. We've got an 8 and a 6-year-old, so it's been we're sandwiched either side of your 7-year-old, so they do slightly different stuff. But we had what they did today. It sounds like they've been looking at animal books and looking at the 6-year-old, and then the 8-year-old's been doing some stuff with regards to his and stuff that's been going on. So I think that's what's been going on. I've been cracking on with work all day. So how about you, Nico? What have you been up to today?
Yeah, I think a mixture of you both, working and also being involved in the family life. So actually it didn't change much, the lockdown for me. So
because you're in Italy at the moment, aren't you? So what's the situation out there with the lockdown?
Yeah, it's starting to look a little bit better, thank God. So now some small businesses have started to reopen, and hopefully we are looking at the 4th of May, so in a couple of weeks, we should start to get a little bit more open. So we should be allowed to go out and do other stuff. I mean, we don't know, we just need to see with the numbers and act accordingly, I guess.
Yeah, it's difficult. What are your
questions?
Are there concerns about it coming back if people come out too soon there?
Yeah, I think the majority of the cases has happened in 2/3 main regions in the north. So, the places in the south, they really would like to start, but because there is not a lot of cases, but in the same time, they are very wary of the spread of the virus. So if they do start opening up, and then people from the north goes to the south or vice versa, there another wave of infections can come. So I think that we have done so much, so it would be silly to just open up everything now. So all of the progresses they might get lost. So I think it's a very conservative approach.
Yeah,
people are definitely getting stressed out.
Yeah, we should at some point we should definitely talk about what people should be doing if they've had like viruses or their immune system's been attacked by it, because I think that's something really beneficial that we can help a lot of people with. But whilst we're in lockdown, one of the common things that people are complaining of is IBS symptoms. So we thought a small series on IBS would be quite useful for people there at home to learn a little bit about IBS and symptoms and what they should be looking out for when it comes to this common diagnosis, I'd say. I see quite a lot of people have been diagnosed with IBS. So when is IBS not IBS? What kind of things might people be suffering with if they've been given a diagnosis of IBS or they think they've got IBS? What other things might be going on there that they need to be looking out for?
So I guess sort of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is gastrointestinal discomfort in many ways. Things like constipation, like fluctuation between constipation and diarrhea. So 1 minute you can't go, the next minute you can't help but go. Things like belching, gas, abdominal pains, cramps, things like that, reflux. So just a very obvious discomfort, particularly around eating meals. So you feel you have something to eat and drink, and you think, I just don't feel well after it. You know, there's symptoms. But all IBS says is that you have symptoms similar to the ones I've just mentioned. It's not a clear diagnosis of specifically what's wrong. It just means that you're showing symptoms of gastrointestinal distress.
Yeah. So, Nico, there's lots of different things that could. Thanks a lot, Jane. Nico, there's loads of little things that can cause symptoms that might manifest as IBS. But what would you say the more uncommon things are that could be causing issues with people's stomachs and giving them like bloating or constipation or diarrhea symptoms?
I mean, like Jane was saying, the cause is not quite understood. What we know, or what we are thinking about, what the medical is thinking about, is that there might be something going wrong with the communication between the gut and the brain, and that might cause, a series of signs and symptoms that obviously is very individual and it differs from loads of things. So a problem in the nervous system might very well be part of it. I think also inflammations or in the intestine that can cause discomforts, history of infections or current infections might cause some sort of, especially like the diarrhea, for example, personally, I found that people who are left with the scar tissues after operations, after deliveries, C-sections, etc., might develop some problem with digestion because of the scar tissues. So those are all things, I guess changes in the gut bacteria as well, so in the microflora can also cause IBS-like symptoms. But these are all suggestions. These are all things that we have found, but there is not yet one cause.
Yeah, it's one of those conditions, isn't it? It's multifactorial, so lots of different things that can affect IBS. So for me, in terms of where we all find ourselves now, a big one is stress. So people that are stressed, that's probably the biggest cause of IBS at the moment. So I think the main thing that Jane and Nico have said is absolutely right, and I think that it's more of a symptom of gastrointestinal discomforts or issues. So anything could cause IBS, and I think nailing it down to a really good case history, that's really important when you go through and find out really what's going on inside the tummy that's giving you these symptoms of bloating, constipation, diarrhea, stomach pain, difficulty with bowel motions, pain on eating. They're all symptoms of IBS. So those are, what would you say the most common symptoms are that people come in with? Have I missed any there?
Yeah, for me, I would say lower back pain. Especially in my job. Sometimes I also get people complaining of, lower back pain, constipation, diarrhea, with tiredness, with the lack of energy. So that might be something else, or even crampings.
Yeah.
Cramping.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
I find, sorry, just for me to answer the
That's
question.
Right.
bloating seems to be one of the biggest ones that I hear. I eat and then I'm bloated. I eat a big meal, I'm bloated, that's normal, but then I'll eat an apple and a cracker and I'll bloat again. Particularly with women, this feeling of, you start the day with a flat stomach and by the end of the day, it looks like you're, 6 months pregnant. So that's definitely one kind of, and it not really being linked to any particular food tolerance, just eating alone then causes, let's say, the stomach to swell and burping, gas, things like that. So
So that's a really interesting symptom, because probably over the last year or so, maybe the last year and a half or so, there's been a really increased trend in people coming in with like gluten sensitivity, and coming in with bloating and gloating from gluten. Maybe we call it gloating from now on, from gluten. Coming up with this stuff. Bloating associated with gluten sensitivity. But what are your thoughts on that? What causes the bloating in people's stomachs? It's painful, isn't it, when you get it? If you've ever had it, I don't know if you've ever had it yourselves, but it's pretty uncomfortable. I remember as a kid, I used to have, we never knew what it was, but there was something in my diet, and he always used to trigger, I think it was ice cream. So I think my dad has a bit of a lactose intolerance. I'm sure you won't mind me saying, but it's I've never treated him as a patient, so it's not really confidential. He's my dad, so we can talk about my dad. But he has a bit of a lactose intolerance. So I think was something to do with ice cream. But can you grow out of sensitivities as well, Jane?
Can you grow out of them? Yes and no. I think you'll always be somewhat sensitive.
Yeah.
But you will build a resistance or a tolerance.
Yeah.
Ice cream, however, is one of those many. I don't know if I'm not that much of an expert specifically on ice cream. A lot of people have written quite bad reports of it based on different research and how it is one of the kind of difficult, dangerous foods. It's been a long time since I've read the actual research on it, so I hope I don't want to say anything that's inaccurate. But that in particular might not be lactose, it might be something within the ice cream itself and maybe the type of brand. But in terms of sensitivities, and you mentioned gluten as well, I think for a long time, gluten, unfortunately, was the go-to component really to take out of your diet. This, it's probably gluten you're intolerant to, therefore go gluten-free. And there was almost then a trend of gluten-free, like as soon as you had anything wrong, and a lot of people did feel better for it. But unless you're actually really diagnosed as a celiac and have a diagnosed genuine gluten intolerance, there really is no reason that you can't eat gluten, because it can be many other things. For example, rather than it being a gluten intolerance, it could be a yeast intolerance or a yeast overgrowth, not even intolerance. And there can be just, as I say, inflammation, as Nico mentioned before, and just neurotransmitters being somewhat blurred between the brain and the gut, and it not signaling properly. So I think if anyone immediately goes into the kind of trend of just cutting out what seems to be the problem with many other people, they could find themselves maybe finding some relief for a short time, but not really isolating the problem and treating the cause of what's going on. Sorry if I've been walking.
No, it's good. Mark Williams is just agreeing that milkshake kills him. It sounds like his stomach hurts as well. So I've just said, me too.
Yeah, I'll put
Still fancy a milkshake once in a while, though. Bad, isn't it? It's bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't bash ice cream, but I will try and find the articles I've read on it. If
that'd be really interesting.
Because
really interesting.
Before, when you said the word ice cream, something back and there's something about ice cream in your spleen and different things like that. I will put that up. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'd be really fascinated to read that, actually. Do you think that people could just generally have a low-grade irritation to their GI tract, and pretty much anything they put in there then irritates it and causes the symptoms of bloating, especially gut bacteria. If they've got imbalances in gut bacteria, and then they could have ice cream or wheat or gluten or anything that goes in there could potentially irritate it. So it's not really that's causing the problem. That triggers it, but there's an underlying issue that could be there as well. And stress affects gut bacteria as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So high levels of stress will inevitably, for over long periods of time, again, we spoke about this last week, being in the fight or flight continuously can cause things like SIBO and CFO, so fungal overgrowth as well, things like Candida albicans, and then problems with yeast. And then they not only lead to bloating, but can, further sort of nastier symptoms like infections, reoccurring urinary tract infections, infections, all sorts of things like that. So yeah, like you said, rightly so, any food, particularly the high sugar, refined carbohydrates, alcohol, anything like that, will immediately cause problems. Yeah.
And do you find that people who are affected with these things can actually crave the sugar as a result of that as well?
Yeah.
Which is a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because you feel like you want it, but actually it messes you up by having it. So it's not good. It's like the milkshake effect, isn't it? Mark Williams would probably agree with this, that the more you have it, the more it upsets your tummy, but then a couple of days later you want another one to wash it down again.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Why is that? What is it that causes that? Just the bacteria telling you that that's what they want, or how?
It feeds off. That's what it lives off. Yeah. Like almost similar to a parasite. It's almost telling you kind of what it wants, and triggers the cravings to kind of in the gut to influence the brain to say, oh, I want more sugar, because it's almost starting to take control, and it's doing a great job. So how you do that is definitely for a short time, if you can, cut out, be tested first for what it actually is, and then cut out what is feeding it and helping it to grow, and then put in things that can fight it off.
So Isha, our other nutritionist that works in the clinic, she specializes in gut bacteria, and one of the things that she we always we don't joke about it because it's not a nice thing to joke about, but it's always like an interesting conversation around how not many people can actually do a diet that's going to eliminate the sugar in particular. It seems to be a very difficult thing to get rid of from your diet, especially because of the rebound effects of cutting it out of your diet altogether. So it's almost like a drug, isn't it? I know we're going to talk about this later with the dentist, but we're just warming up for that as well, which is quite a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that?
So coming off sugar?
Yeah, coming off sugar, and also the rebound effect of like what the bacteria does to you as a result of that. It makes you feel pretty groggy.
Yeah, headaches are the biggest thing you get. Also sugar and things like caffeine you might have to cut out, but fatigue, initially, people don't feel well on these prescribed diets, because again, it's the bacteria trying to kind of fight its way for survival. But also, even as you said, like sugar is at times like a drug, and you do miss it once it's gone out of there. Your body craves it, it wants it again. So things like headaches and fatigue would be the main ones. Can at times even increase the symptoms. So like the IBS symptoms, like if you need constipation or the fluctuations, they need to go to the bathroom. But at the time, usually about 4 days, I'd say maximum, things start to come right.
4 days. It's a long time without sugar. Mark Williams has just said you can't come off sugar, and he's laughing. He says, I think he likes his sugar, it sounds like.
You can come off sugar.
Yeah, I know you can. Yeah. But so Nico, Jane was just mentioning about kind of this fatigue and joint pain and achiness in your body. I guess, why do you think people get back pain associated with the IBS? What's the mechanism there?
Yeah, if so, we talked about last week when we talked about constipation, about somatovisceral or viscerosomatic reflex. It's basically it's the communication between the organs, so the small intestine or the large intestine, with the spinal column, and then these nerves they will innervate the muscles as well. So it's the signal coming from an area of the intestine that is actually referring pain into the somatic component, to the body component, and usually we'll have lower back pain associated with this. Also, because if there is an inflammation, the whole the whole membranes of the intestine is going to tighten up, is going to get a little bit more rigid, and this is no one. All of the organs, they are attached onto the spine and to the abdominal wall, so the lower back is going to feel quite stiff, and the stiffer it feels, sometimes the pain goes up because you don't want to move it, and when you don't move it, the inflammation is just going to accumulate in the area there. So having an effect on the drainage of the gut and the drainage of the spine. So these are all components that then we work on when we are looking at managing symptoms, and with that trying to get down to a cause, to the root cause.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because a lot of the well, pretty much all of the neurotransmitters are formed in the gut, aren't they? With the assimilation of the proteins that then form the neurotransmitters from the gut bacteria assimilation. So there's a big link between gut bacteria and kind of psychological factors, aren't there? So not only stress from external factors, but also like psychological factors driven from gut bacteria as well. So do you guys come across that much in clinic? Obviously, it's difficult to know where it started, but the association is probably something you're more aware of if you see it.
Yeah, definitely. The gut, for me, is the access to the brain. If you put your hand on the gut, you are basically touching the brain, from my point of view, because there are so many synapses, so many nerves ending in there, and with the vagus nerve being one of the largest, that you can really have quite a bit of an impact, with the gut-brain axis, and as you were saying, with the neurotransmitters as well.
What about you, Jane?
One of the things I certainly notice, people with, as I say, IBS symptoms that come in, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, and they'll have very stressful lives, and feel somewhat, on some level, very down or even depressed. And I do find that when they clean their diet up, shall we say, in order to treat the symptoms they're having, and once they've gone through the kind of, if they need to go through a very specific plan, they do that, and then kind of try to just, as they eat well, and kind of not go for those bad foods that we all know exist. Moods improve. I've also seen a lot with adding probiotics, which can really help the friendly bacteria that benefits the gut. So the inclusion of those with herbs, spices, loads of color in their food and variety, more cooking at home, that in general, they feel happier. I think just shows how, psychologically, just eating well and making sure that your gastrointestinal tract is in tip-top shape will then, psychologically make you feel better.
I guess not having a tummy and having to go to the toilet all the time probably makes you feel a bit better as well, right?
Not running to the loo,
yeah. But I think it's all. Sorry, what's that?
If you're on the tube and you suddenly have to go, you're going to be depressed.
Yeah, very stressful. Yeah, well, I've had. I always ask people how what we do with them affects them in terms of their life. So, what kind of things would they be able to do as a result of us helping them? So there's one lady that said to me, well, listen, I'd be able to walk 10 minutes without having to go to a toilet, because she was just had such bad IBS symptoms that actually she just couldn't control her going to the toilet at all. So it was really, really distressing for her, unbelievable. So that, I mean, the quality of life after we were able to help her was just dramatic. She saw Isha, the nutritionist, and we worked with her with some osteopathy work as well. Nico, it's interesting you mentioned about putting the hand on the gut being like touching the brain. Is it just because there's a lot of the neurons inside the gut are formed from ectoderm, just as the same as the brains form the ectodermal tissue as well as the skin. Do you think that's why it's such a sensitive area in terms of people's reaction to it, in terms of the massive improvements in quality of life when you help someone with digestive problems, and the massive detrimental effect when someone has digestive problems?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if we look, I'm sure you know, but we are basically almost sensory. So we perceive information rather than moving, etc. That is a very small part of what we do. But what the nervous system in our body is basically feeling at all times. And and we need food to sustain life. So food is it's an essential component. We can't live without a liver, or we can't live without those organs. Compared to we can live without an arm. So this is how important those are. And the nervous system in those organs is it's very active. It's very acute. It's going to pick up every small change that is happening at biochemical or a mechanical level. So I think this is why there is such a big communication between the gut and the brain. What do you think?
Me? Yeah, I think because my background's neuroscience, so I always come at things and think, well, how is that because everyone's born from two cells, so a sperm and an egg, so everything derives from that. So there's a principle in physics called first principle. So I try and follow that with the way that I think about a lot of things, and try and strip things down to the very basic elements, and then build it back up into asking the question, well, if that happens, then why does this happen? So I think a lot of if you strip everything back, you basically form the notochord, which is your primitive nervous system. And you have your sprouts that come out that form your brain eventually, and you have your sprouts that come out that form your digestive tract and the nerves around your digestive tract as well. So you just can't separate it. And your skin as well is all formed from the same tissue. So when you see people that have like eczema, and you see people that have digestive problems, and they come in, they say, oh, yeah, my skin's a bit dry, or I get this kind of rash, or they come in with psoriasis, you kind of, as me, maybe as other people as well, hopefully, you don't just think of it as being the skin. You think of, well, actually, yeah, the skin's part of the same system that forms your brain and your gut as well. So have they got other problems associated with that could be driving these external factors as well? So because you can't separate it. We only came from two cells, egg and the sperm. So they joined together, and then they formed a flat sheet of cells, and then the flat sheet of cells forms a tube, and then you get all this kind of evolution that happens in this one organism, and everything came from those two cells. So it has to be connected. There's no way you can separate these things. I think the only thing you can separate really is environmental factors around people, but the way they interpret them is down to the makeup and how everything's connected, I think. So yeah, I think it's definitely food for thought in terms of the way that we should start to look at things from a medical perspective anyway. Because I think putting cream on eczema or putting cream on psoriasis, yes, it helps you with the symptoms, but would you like to get rid of that completely by looking at your digestion, or looking at how your body's functioning, really, or looking at your excretory system about why that's not functioning, or your stress levels and your psychology to see what's going on there? I think it's it's just, I think I'm not one, when patients come in, I'm not one to, if someone comes in with a skin rash and they've come in with their back, I'll mention their skin rash, but if they don't want me to treat it, I'll leave it alone. We'll just deal with their back when they're open. Often, hopefully they're so impressed with how they deal with their back. When I mention about their skin condition, then they start to say, "Oh, do you know what? I've had that for years. Do you think it could be related to my back?" And I'm like, yeah, there's probably lots of stuff going on with you. Should we go into a bit more detail about it? But I'm not a salesman in the sense that, like, yeah, we can, like, you can throw a lot of complementary. I think one of the issues with complementary medicine practitioners as a whole, and I'm going to get shot down for this, I know it, but it tends to be from a, like, yes, we can help all these things. And yes, you can help all these things with diet, with your mindset, with moving better, and with getting the right environment and the social environment sorted. But there's an element of, if it's not broke, should you offer people to try and fix it, try and convince them that you can help them? Because it's interesting. Maybe that's another subject. But Kirsty was just asking about her colitis. So she said that she suffered from frequent episodes of colitis. Is colitis a form of IBS, or does it cause symptoms of IBS? In your opinions?
I don't know if it falls under really a symptom. I think it's, in my opinion, something that is diagnosed and should be treated.
Yeah, you know, colitis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is she just commenting now? Because it'd be interesting to find out sort of more about it.
Yeah.
As I say, just to be general.
So generally, I think that so generally, I think that colitis, generally people put down to stress-related factors, don't they, in terms of the way that they manage it. So they get stressed, their stomach starts hurting, and then they get diagnosed as having colitis, and then they're given immunosuppressants mostly to help deal with the colitis, because it tends to be, there's an autoimmune connection to it, isn't there, colitis? So that tends to be what gets treated. And then obviously dealing with the stress as well.
Dealing with the stress, and then, as I said, inflammation as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think figuring out the full symptoms and how it's actually impacted the individual, and then how they got the diagnosis, you know, through tests or kind of process of elimination. But I wouldn't necessarily, I think in itself it is, I would say, a full diagnosis if it has been tested. But yeah, IBS is, I don't know, maybe wrong, but in my opinion, for treating it, I wouldn't necessarily.
No. So what I was saying is that the common symptoms of so colitis falls under inflammatory bowel disease, so IBD. So often that gets confused with IBS, which is inflammatory bowel syndrome. So I think there's often, in the general public, there can be a bit of a misconception between the two, and people just think it's IBS, but actually there's this underlying inflammatory bowel disease that hasn't really been diagnosed yet. They're getting stressed and they think it's IBS, but actually you've got something there that is a physical thing, like you're saying, that you probably need to be investigated and treated. So it's not falling under IBS, but I think in the general public, there tends to be this a bit of misinformation about the S and the D being forgotten or mixed up somehow. So so Kirsty was saying that it started as proctitis, which is a common way that it can start it, or proctoileitis it can be. Sorry, proctitis is the right. So she's put proctitis, but I think she means proctitis, which is the terminal end of the large intestine, isn't it, that gets inflamed, and you can get kind of buttock type issues related with that at the terminal part of the ileum, the colon even, sorry. Yeah. So do you see many people with colitis in the clinic or in your practice from nutrition? And obviously, Nico, you must see quite, I imagine.
I don't know. I mean, I'm personally, I've treated very few cases of colitis.
Right.
Usually, if it's going to be anything gut related, what I tend to come across more is symptoms of, let's say, either parasite or bacterial overgrowth. A lot of women in particular with Candida albicans, so the yeast overgrowth. In particular, women who have, I think Nico mentioned before, even having cesareans, and after having their children as well, they can tend to have different overgrowths and problems. But colitis isn't something haven't treated that many patients with. Maybe I think I had one, but it's not something I come across a lot. I don't know if Nico, if you find.
Yeah, no, I came across to a couple of people with colitis, some with Crohn's as well. So it's, I mean, it's not something very commonly on a daily basis, but I think I would definitely see 2 or 3 people a month with that they come to me because of lower back pain, and they also have something like this. So they don't come to me because of the colitis, but they come to me as a general health program, but mainly will be the lower back pain. And to be honest, I would say before we were talking about the diet, etc. I think usually we in practice we have a three-dimensional approach, like what Stephen was talking about before, and that sometimes can help very much the symptoms, even with IBD problem. Maybe it doesn't cure the problem, but it definitely helps quite a bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Kirsty said that she had a colonoscopy. It's been diagnosed, which is good. And she's been trying to cut out different food types, but nothing makes a difference. So what would you say about that?
I think maybe working on regulating the inflammatory response in many ways, just to try and focus, because it is predominantly due to inflammation and problems in that area. So if cutting out foods doesn't seem to be having an effect, you might need to look deeper. I mean, we did already discuss things like psychologically, if there's a lot of stress and external factors, but really going through kind of what's included in the diet to see if there's anything that might be lacking or any deficiencies, things like that. So as a nutritionist, that's where I would start. So because it is difficult to sort of cut out and then reintroduce and really figure out what it is, when maybe it's something more to do with, as I say, responses and nervous systems. So.
Yeah. I think for me the main thing there is dealing with the finding out if there's any underlying cause, because if there is something that hasn't been diagnosed, getting thorough diagnosis, it's key that you kind of look at all the possible causes of what could be going on, because they might not be quite right, and then you're missing something that you could actually treat. Then if it is colitis, dealing with the stress elements of it, I mean, the big one for me is modulating the inflammatory and the immune responses. So working with someone that can test you for that, and also get some, be very specific about what they're doing, rather than general advice about cutting things out and eliminating things. It might actually be, like you mentioned, you might be missing something that you need to add in, rather than just taking away all the time. So, but I guess you don't know unless you get it tested. So I think the advice to Kirsty would be to get some tests done with someone like Jane, to really get an understanding of what your body's doing now. So then we can look at like giving you very specific advice based on what's there and what not these other things. So yeah, Kirsty agrees with that as well. So Kirsty, I'll give you Jane's contact details so you can get in contact with her. And then I always speak to this. I should be speaking to here. I need to get out of that habit. Sorry, Kirsty, but we'll give you Jane's information so you can get in contact with her and just have a chat initially and see if there is something there that you can be helped with. and hopefully you get it sorted out, because it must be very uncomfortable for you.
I think that's good that you mentioned there. It's not always about cutting out. Most of the time it is, but there are times when it's what's not being included can also be a huge factor in actually, treating the actual cause and getting you back to health and no longer having the symptoms. As I say, they go hand in hand. Yeah,
for sure. Big time. So, Nico, we spent all this time talking about osteopathy and people's tummies, but you don't actually put your hand inside people, do you? When you work on their tummy? Because some people at home, I think they're probably thinking that right now. But Nico, you've got some videos about the kind of stuff that you do, and it'd be great to find out a bit more about, for those people at home, what visceral osteopathy is and how it works. So how would you treat someone with IBS symptoms? We'll come back to Jane in a second with regards to how she treats it.
I have prepared a video here. Shall I share it so everybody can see?
Why not?
Yes.
Why not? Let's do it.
You could just watch it yourself. That wouldn't be as much fun, though.
Sorry, say it again.
You could just watch it yourself.
No, of course not. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, brilliant.
Great.
Thank you.
Colon I found here.
So he's working through the colon.
If you just mute it, Nico, so that the sound's not coming out, so that'd be great.
Yeah. So they are basically a fairly gentle technique. They don't feel too invasive. Sometimes they can be a little bit sensitive if there is some inflammation, but more often than not, they are actually fairly gentle. And so he's doing a mobilization of the large intestine here. So he's just really trying to relax a little bit the smooth muscles of the large intestine.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few techniques, but this is more.
So Nico, I'm just going to ask you some questions, because this kind of is useful for people to understand. Now, if I had a bloated tummy, last thing I want would be someone poking around inside my tummy like that. Yeah. Where is it that you treat? Because I'm sure people at home would be thinking, well, I'm not going to have that done because I've got a bloated tummy and this guy's going to go and stick his fingers right in there. That's going to hurt. So what is it that you treat in there? Because it's the small intestine that becomes inflamed or around that area, isn't it, when you have IBS?
Yeah. Now, it really, it will depend. If the person comes in and the symptoms they are very acute, then we would use a much more conservative approach. So I might start actually from the lower back rather than going into the tummy. Or I might start higher up in the chest, getting the diaphragm working. So I might not touch the tummy at all. Or I might use the legs to get some harmonics, to get a little bit of movement into the tummy. And this is when things are acute, when we can't go in the tummy at all. When things are a little bit less, we might just start with a very gentle massage of the tummy. That actually helps quite a lot, and soothing the nervous system, calming it down, bringing a little bit of blood flow, etc. And then as the patient usually needs maybe 2-3 sessions to get comfortable with the type of treatment and with the symptoms as well, then we might start to do a little bit more work on the actual organs or the actual areas, to improve. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it's really, really good. I think that's useful for people at home, because sometimes visceral sounds very painful or invasive or something like that. So it's actually very gentle techniques and very specific. So Nico will probably also work up on the base of the head and the neck, because of where the nerves come down that control the stomach, and also over the lower back and the sacral area as well, because they're very important areas to help regulation of the autonomic nervous system. So the nervous system that controls the gut is controlled by those areas. So if people have neck pain or neck stiffness and are tense around here, that's going to reflect down onto the other parts of their body as well, possibly as a result of that as well. So it's important to have a very holistic view. I definitely think visceral osteopaths tend to be more holistic in their approach rather than like musculoskeletal ones tend to be very much joint orientated and getting things moving, and actually the visceral ones and cranial ones tend to be more rounded in terms of their approach, in terms of dealing with the whole body from a structural point of view anyway. Yeah.
And Nico, that's a really interesting video just to see it. So would it be sort of essential for people to fast for a certain period of time before having anything like that done? Obviously,
sorry, I didn't quite
putting pressure you know, on the abdomen, would it be necessary for them to fast for a certain time before having a procedure like that done? Just this is my curiosity.
No, it's
Yeah, no.
it very so if I understand correctly the question, it varies according to the level of symptoms, to where they are at on the spectrum. Those might be the appropriate technique. But like Stephen was saying, sometimes we need to prepare the area to receive a particular technique. So I might want to work in the first session onto the sacrum or the base of the head, or targeting the diaphragm, for example, because it might not be appropriate to target the organs straight away. Does that make sense? So, but the treatment plan has to be specific. It has to be, you know,
when you say specific, it's individual for the individual person, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
And specific.
Sorry,
yeah.
Much better terminology. So it has to be individualized for the client. So I might introduce them. You know, some people have had visceral osteopathy in the past. Some people have had you know, massaging in the gut, etc. But it's usually you know, step by step. I like to add things just step by step, just to check, you know, if they are ready. Then I want to see how they react. Sometimes if I go straight into the gut, the symptoms, they might actually get worse for you know, first 12 24 hours. So this is another reason for why I might start gentle and then adding a little bit more, just to check how the body is responding to this type of treatment. You know, I will give them plenty of advices in case something happens, so that they have some sort of control over the situation, and they can start to learn how to manage it. Because IBS, usually people, this is almost a lifelong type of problem.
Nico, I had an interesting case the other day online, actually. So this chap's, he's taken a bit of confidence building to get to the point where he trusts me enough to trust my judgment on where I think the problem's coming from. So we've been maybe 3 sessions in. He feels better, which is great, but he felt much better after we actually showed him how to do some visceral, even just some very basic diaphragm release. We did a little bit of work on the descending colon, because he felt it was quite tight in that region, just very basic stuff, but it made such a big difference. So he said his hips moved better, so he could walk better, like completely much better, like not waddling along, but actually physically moving better. He didn't say his breathing was better, but what he did say is his neck tightness and stiffness and headaches completely cleared after that 1 session. Massive difference. Yeah. So I think it's definitely an underutilized area of physical medicine, treating the gut to help improve these other things that people come in with.
Yeah.
But headaches are a big thing, aren't they, for visceral?
I agree. The problem is always the research. We don't have enough research to back up all of these things up. But we give so much input from clients. You know, clients do tell us that the results that they have is quite remarkable. So we can only base ourselves on this. Headache is another one of those, like you were saying. I tend to work quite a lot on the stomach when people come for a headache, and then of course, you know, on the head, on the neck, etc. But I tend to work quite a lot on the stomach and the diaphragm. I don't know what you tend to do, and then
I think, like you said before, it's individual. So if I go through a case history, obviously a lot of it is my experience. So obviously I've seen a lot of people since I've been qualified, and I haven't got all the answers, but I've seen so many people that you can kind of get a good place, good idea of where you should start with certain people, and you've got to start somewhere. So it's like the way I describe it to patients is it's like a big ball of wool that's tangled. What you don't go and do is say, right, that's the end of it, and you pull it, because everything else can get tighter around that. So that can cause a lot of problems if you just dive in there and treat the one bit that you think is causing a problem. But I like in our osteopathic training, Jane, we talk about find it, fix it, and leave it alone. So I always remember that when I've got every single patient, that we need to look at everything that's going on with them first, find out everything that's going on, whether it's social, stress levels, dietary, their movement, their pain levels, the environment, all those things are really important. So find the main problems, try and fix some of them or address the ones that you can do, the low-hanging fruit, and then watch what happens with their body. Because ultimately, one of the other osteopathic kind of dictums is about the structure and function. So when something is structurally not working properly, it's also not going to functionally work properly as well. And then because it's not functionally operating, it's also not going to be structurally integral as well. So the two are completely related in our books to each other. So like if you can't move your legs quickly, you're not going to be able to run fast. Simple, right? If you've got slow moving legs and your muscles don't work, you're not going to be able to run fast. So that's a very easy way of understanding structure and function. So when I explain it to patients, I use that analogy quite a bit, which is quite straightforward and easy to understand. But if your back is stiff and you're sat down on your chair all day, your stomach, which is sat right in front of that, is probably not going to be functioning properly as well. Purely, some people have really good functioning stomachs, but it's going to be a lot slower than it is normally. So it's going to be suboptimal in terms of its function. So that might bring things to the surface that might be a problem, like IBS and other things like that as well. So it's just, you just got to be observant and listen to what's going on with the patient. So I think that's really important from our point of view. But yeah, you're not always right. So you've got to be open to that as well, that you're always looking at challenging yourself and trying to prove yourself wrong. We talked about that in the, we had a team meeting today, and I said to the guys, which I'm not sure if it surprised them or not, but every time I see a client, when I see them the next time, I always try and prove myself wrong for the time before. So if I thought it was their kidney that was causing a problem, I always try and think, oh, actually, I need to go back and think, is it still their kidney that's causing the problem? Because then you're constantly like, you've got a different hypothesis. But the best thing is when you prove yourself right, and yes, you're right, and then you keep going. But you just got to watch things, because sometimes you change one bit and then something else changes as a response of that working better. So then you need to reevaluate things and look over how the body's functioning and adapting to that. So do you find that, Jane, with your nutrition, that you change one thing in their diet, and obviously the case history makes it, the better you get a case history, the less likely that is to happen, because you're going to pick out everything straight away. But sometimes patients don't tell you everything, do they? And you change something and then something else changes because they weren't open with you, or they missed something that they didn't think was important.
Yeah, I mean, I do find, I always start with a health questionnaire, food diaries, and not just the food, but sort of symptoms, related, everything like that. So I investigate as much as I can. Life stressors, work, environment, family, who does the cooking in the house. I ask everything. So I do a thorough, tell me everything.
Dad's dodgy cooking in my house anyway. That's why I don't cook. I'd give everyone food poisoning. They'd all be coming to see you, Jane, to work out what's wrong with them.
All right. Okay. Stop Dad cooking. So kind of a thorough investigation will initially lead to, okay, this is how we're going to move forward. But always my first kind of follow-up will be, I mean, you can't come every day, would not make sense, because it takes time for, things to take time, like adjust and change in terms of nutrition. But I do find 2 weeks later, when we have a follow-up, in general, things are usually going well, but I will always sort of say, anything else happened though that is strange or out of the ordinary, or anything didn't work, or anything made it worse, I always know that there's a possibility that people are going to come back and say, Yeah, no, for the most part it worked, but I suddenly, had started having, really vivid, weird dreams, and bizarre, honestly, the most strangest things come out of the woodwork, and you think, okay, so it's this, but this could also be linked to this, and so therefore maybe we didn't look closely enough at this area, and then we changed from there. But definitely, I think what I've experienced from being a nutritionist and trying to help people, whether it's weight loss to, gut problems to athletes wanting to perform better, is you're always going to kind of come across other factors, internal and external, as you go along the path. And it's just about saying, okay, fine, so now we're just going to make some slight adjustments and continue on with that. They're just necessary,
Yeah, definitely. And I think IBS is probably one of those conditions, isn't it, where you do need to be very thorough with the case history and make sure you look at all the different factors that are there, getting the right test done, obviously keeping it, if it's privately, keeping the cost down if we can, and then also looking at using the doctor to help guide the doctor with regards to some of these, I guess you class them as functional bowel disorders, wouldn't you? So like stress related and related to environment and other factors as well. So super important to be quite open with that. But it's been great talking to you tonight, guys.
Yeah, it's been great.
Likewise.
So what would you say just so that people at home get the value out of the team here, what would you say your top 3 tips would be for people suffering with IBS, or they think they've got IBS? What would you tell them to do?
I'm going to try and be clever for mine at work, and use for my 3 the letters I, B, and S. So number 1, I, investigate. So
I like that one. Let's see if you can get the S.
Investigate your symptoms. So what are you experiencing? Keep a diary of what you're experiencing, what you've been eating, any kind of common denominators in there, and then try to kind of distinguish, okay, have I got IBS? What does it seem like? Don't over investigate and go on Google, because God knows you'll probably hear you've got cancer, but which is probably not right.
I think the interesting thing about
Google seems
that is that if you put anything onto Google, because the worst stuff ends up on Google, who would want to go and say, oh, do you know what, they said I had this, but actually it was something really benign and it went away and no one was worried about it. You wouldn't go and talk about that on the internet. What you're going to go and talk about is, oh, I had this little thing and it turned out to be this really big thing. So that's the stuff that ends up on the internet. So if you search for stuff, that's what you end up with.
So investigate, but don't go mad kind of Googling and looking things up. So take the time to record your food, record your symptoms, and therefore you have a clear picture of what your symptoms are and what might trigger them and what you're experiencing. And then B, better diet. So try to
Could you have that one, Nico? I'd put that under D for diet.
No, better diet.
Better diet.
Diet is just, even in Greek, it's just like a lifestyle or eating. But so improve it and like keep it pure, home cooking. We all know what's bad for us. So junk food, toxins, too much sugar, too much alcohol, coffee, anything like that. So a better diet. So investigate better diet and see what happens even if you just improve your diet. And S would be stress.
Oh, that's good.
That's it. So try and find ways to relieve your stress, and definitely don't bring stress to the table.
Mindful eating again.
Mindful eating, as I said.
There we go.
Tell your food you love it. As I said last week, mindful eating, calm, not stressful.
Good. Nico, is this going to be a theme now? Everyone has to think of IBS-related IBS factors. What would be your top 3 tips for someone who is coming in complaining of IBS?
No, I'm going to give you 2 only because I agree so much with what Jane just said that I think that is already enough in terms of tips. But two things that I suggest people. One is to to chew a lot more so that they can produce more saliva, and that sometimes can help, with the hormones, with the enzymes, sorry, it can help to digest. And easy way is I like to give them when you have a prune, a dry prune with the stone inside, and you just keep the stone inside your mouth for a little bit longer, 5 minutes, as if it was, don't bite into it, obviously, otherwise you break your teeth, but that just produces more saliva. And then another one is just using a hot water bottle on the tummy to soothe down a little bit the symptoms.
Great.
Yeah.
You want to hear mine?
Go on then.
So mine would be interconnectedness. So interconnectedness is important. Interconnectedness of symptoms is really important because you've got to think about how the different things that you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So whether that be stress, the food that you eat, the environment, the people you keep company with, the stuff you watch on TV, all of that's all interconnected, and that can cause a huge amount of stress on your body, which can then lead to a lot of these symptoms like IBS as a functional bowel disorder. So B would be blood in your stool. If you've got blood in your stool, you probably don't have IBS. You probably have something else going on. So it's very important to get that investigated. It could be a sign of colitis or some kind of irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, or like piles or something else there. So really important, if you've got blood in your stool and you've got IBS type symptoms, get it investigated because it could be something else that's going on. So as we said, IBS is a symptom of other things that could be going inside your stomach. And S would be, what's S? S, without stress. I think stress is such a big thing, and that would be my S, but Jane stole that one. So my S would be related to symptoms. So I think the understanding all of the symptoms that go on with that, making sure you identify all of them, getting a very clear diagnosis, like Jane was saying, investigate, looking at for the symptoms that you've got and getting a real clear understanding about what's going on with your symptoms. Like we said, blood, if you've got blood and it's a clinical sign, then you need to really try and get that investigated. But the symptoms to a professional should really give you a clear indication about how to go about resolving the issue as well. But I could have said sugar, I could have said anything else, but I didn't. I said symptoms, and that's it. So those are our top 3 tips for dealing with IBS. If you do have IBS or you do have IBS symptoms, or any other digestive issues that you think it's not really going away with the advice that I've been given, these 2 will be able to help you out significantly by getting a very clear understanding about what's going on so you can get it straight in your head. And then we can look and see if we can help you clinically as well. But make sure you kind of reaching out to people that do think about the whole picture as well. That interconnectedness for me is a real big thing in terms of my clinic, and making sure that we look at all the factors that are going on rather than just looking at the individual symptoms in isolation. So hopefully you found that really helpful tonight. It'd be great to see you again for next week. The guys are going to be back, and we're going to try and make it a little bit fun, more interactive, and hopefully make it medicine not so scary, and hopefully we'll make it so that we feel like we're approachable and you can come speak to us about anything that you're concerned about as well. But it's been real fun tonight, and hopefully you will join us again. Jane's going to stick around because we've got a dentist coming online now, so we're going to talk about sugar. Nico, would you like to stay with us, or you've got to go and have your dinner? You're going to bed, I think. It's in Italy, aren't you?
Yeah, it's 10:30 here. I haven't had dinner yet, so I'm afraid, but I'm not going to be able to join you.
No problem at all.
I'll check Facebook. If I have any question, I'll drop a text.
Not too difficult, I hope, Nico.
Okay.
Brilliant. Good stuff. But for now, it's bye-bye from me, and bye-bye from the team at Perfect Balance.
Bye.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.